Hello, welcome to the interview here on France 24. Well, are millions of Americans being denied one of their most basic rights, the right to vote, by restrictive voting laws that are supposedly aimed at curbing voting fraud? Now, since the 2008 U.S. election of Barack Obama, an election hailed as one of the most racially diverse in the nation's history, dozens of states have passed laws that critics say make it harder for minorities to vote. Now, my guest today is Frédéric Douzet. You're a specialist on U.S. politics and American civilization in general at the French Institute of Geopolitics. And you essentially say it is no coincidence that many of the people who are disenfranchised by these voting laws are the very same people who tend to vote Democratic, and the same people who might decide who's the next U.S. president.
Yes, it's actually the case in states that are likely to swing one way or the other, because in states that are overwhelmingly Republican, these laws are not going to make a huge difference. But the truth is, in many of those states, they passed or they reinforced voter ID laws that make it harder for people either to vote, to register to vote, or they have, like a lot of them have to produce, for example, a photo ID, which many of them don't have. Usually what people use is their driver's license, but you have about 20 million people who don't have driver's licenses. And among them, minorities, elderly, students are overwhelmingly represented. And they tend to all have one thing in common, is that they vote Democratic.
They tend to vote Democratic. I saw an interesting figure recently that up to 20 million Americans, 20 million, don't have either a driver's license or an official state ID.
Right.
And I guess, is it too late then to get them before the election on November 6th? Is that the issue?
Well, it's too late. It might be too complicated. We're talking about a population whose participation is not that high to start with. And there have been huge drives to try to get minorities to register to vote. And we've seen for the 2008 election increased participation among the youth, among minorities who were very enthusiastic for Obama. So this could be understood as a real politicization of the
voting
registration in order to sort of fight the increase of these populations in some key states.
Could we just quickly, let me ask you about one of the groups you mentioned. You said minorities are some of the people who would be discouraged, especially, I suppose, Black Americans. Black Americans, it's no secret, are overwhelmingly in favor of Barack Obama. So I guess that would be an argument in favor of the critics of this law.
Yes, for African Americans, it resonates to the whole fight about the civil rights, and it's a number of those states who have passed those laws are under huge scrutiny because in the past they have violated the Voting Rights Act. So they are like under the scrutiny of Section 5 of the law, and they have to get pre-clearance from either the Department of Justice or some federal court.
Or the federal courts.
Right.
And they've been overturning them in some cases, the federal courts.
In some cases, and in Pennsylvania, it's been postponed to 2013. In South Carolina, the Minister of Justice denied it because he said that he heard the arguments of disenfranchisement of African Americans and other minorities. But I think one key group is also the Hispanic voters. And you have to realize that between 2000 and 2010, 92% of the growth of the population is due to minorities, non-white populations.
And a lot of them Hispanic.
56% of the population growth. But not only that growth, but this growth is really concentrated in some states in the Southwest, in Florida, where they become an increasing share of the electorate, and they can really make a difference.
And sorry not to interrupt you, but I will. But Florida is one of those states where they still have very restrictive laws. What are the laws right now in Florida?
Well, they have like a photo ID. I don't remember whether it's strict or not, because sometimes they can get away with presenting another document, and some require that you have a state, like a government photo ID to present. And in Florida, the Hispanic population has been growing real fast. It used to be more Republican because of the large Cuban population. But what happens now is you have a more diverse Hispanic community, and among the Cubans, the younger generations tend to vote
they're not as
more
Republican
democratic.
as they
They're
used
not
to
as
be.
Republican as they used to be. And we're talking about 29 electoral votes, which is huge.
Giant.
So
yes.
it's giant. So any means to fight this growth in the Democratic electorate can be really useful.
What do you think right now about the Republican, well, I won't say Republican because that's wrong, the people who are passing these laws say that this is a fight against voting fraud. This has nothing to do about racial discrimination or excluding people. They say this is purely to prevent people from voting twice or misidentifying themselves. It's voter fraud. Don't make more of this issue.
Right, except that there is absolutely no evidence of massive voter fraud, and the problems we've found with preventing people to vote or with voter fraud has been more trying to prevent people to vote as opposed to using someone else's identity to vote. So there is no evidence. The argument of the Republicans is to say, well, it's because it's undetected. So it does exist, but it's not detected. So
there's an expression
preventive.
There's this expression in English we often say, a solution looking for a problem.
Right.
It's a little bit like that. So in other words, there wasn't fraud before, but maybe if we pass this law, we can find some fraud.
Right. So there's been some concern about IDs, and we've started seeing those laws from 2003. So it's probably also sort of the impact of September 11 might have played out. But it's no coincidence that right after the midterm elections, when the Republicans won so many majorities in so many states, that you had like 180 proposition bills that were proposed to change the laws, and a number of them passed, and now you have over 30 states which really ask for voter ID, and some of them with photo, and the vast majority of them is Republican.
I'm just curious, you know, one of the justices, Clarence Thomas, on the Supreme Court, a black justice, he grew up in the state of Georgia, so he's supposedly benefited from the Voting Rights Act. He actually is one of the people on the record saying that there is no evidence really that he has seen as discrimination anymore against black people in the United States when it comes to voting. That surprised me. I don't know if it surprises you.
Right. I mean, definitely there's been a lot of progress since the law was passed in 1965, but there are a lot of battles right now that are going on, and which argue that there is an attempt to disenfranchise voters in a number of these states. But that's not just voter ID laws. That's also redistricting. For example, if you look at what's going on in Texas, for example, there are huge concerns. But it's interesting that he's taking this position because a number of these fights are probably going to go up all the way to the Supreme Court.
And what you're talking about, this redistricting, there's actually a word in U.S. politics, gerrymandering, which is why, as you know, you get these weird districts with these weird shapes. Moving on right here, do you think ultimately that the swing states we've been talking about, where many of these voters will be an issue, do you feel that they are sort of justifiable, or how could I actually better phrase this? Do you think they would exist if there was not an electoral college in the United States?
Well, definitely small states like Iowa would not exist in the campaign.
They wouldn't have as much influence.
Well, they wouldn't have any influence at all because, I mean, you take the Electoral College. In Wyoming, you have 500,000 people living. They have 3 electoral votes. You take California, they have 55 electoral votes, except they don't see anything of the campaign. Just because with the system and the winner-take-all system of the election, all you need is a really short majority of the voters in order to get all of
the electoral votes in the state.
So we know that California is going to vote for Obama. California voted at 67% in 2008.
I'm from New York. We know which way New York is going to end up voting.
So the biggest states where the biggest population is concentrated, they just don't see anything of it.
Finally, I just want to end with, you're a specialist in the United States, but you're also a French person looking in from the outside at this process. Do you find it, what do you think when you see all of the politicians going to this one state of Ohio in the final 2-3 weeks of this campaign? They're all there at the same time.
Well, I think it's going to get really ugly, and clearly they're going to be swamped with all these TV ads. Really, I mean, the system creates a situation where the election is won in a few key places in a few key states. Now,
Should it change? Do you think that, would you change it?
It won't change. Well, would I? I have no power
you have no power to do it.
The problem is, in order to change this system, you need a major constitutional crisis. Because as long as the person who wins the electoral vote also wins the majority of the population, then we're fine. There was a crisis in 2000 over the Bush election because he lost by 500,000 votes.
The popular vote, right? Al Gore won the popular vote against George Bush, but lost the Electoral College.
Due to a Supreme Court decision, which was like a long partisan light that stopped the recount of the vote. Now, it's totally possible, considering how tight the election is, that clearly Obama has an advantage if you look at the electoral map, because he's leading in a number of these swing states. So the question is whether he's likely to win with the electoral votes.
I'm not going to make you make any predictions here, but we are going to have to leave it there. Frédérique Douzet, thank you very much for talking to us today a little bit about these restrictive voting laws that critics say are essentially preventing minorities from turning out at the polls on Election Day. Thanks to all of you for watching the interview here on France 24. Thanks very much.